Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the pole barn project. So in the last video I talked about insulation and how the pole barn method is really amenable to getting good insulation because you've got wide open bays between your posts, and if you don't complicate the framing with vertical studs, bookshelf girts, things like that, unnecessary structure, you can fill these bays with insulation and get very good insulation performance just because you've minimized thermal bridging. So I've got the wall insulation done on the pole barn. I'm about to move on to the ceiling, and I figure I wanted to give a status on a few items before I get going on to that. So as I mentioned last time, I'm using faced R19 insulation, and I showed how I put it up in the last video with nails tacked into the exterior girts, really just to pin and hang that insulation inside of the bays. Partway through putting the wall insulation in, I ran out of my long nails and I couldn't find any good nails locally. Generally you want a long nail that's skinny, and everything I could find locally was like a big timber nail, and it seemed ridiculous to be hammering quarter-inch diameter nail to hold up insulation. So I switched to using 6-inch drywall screws, again with the plastic cap like I showed in the last video, plastic washer. These worked really well, so I'll probably start using these more often in the future, and I'll put a link to the plastic washers and the screws on Amazon in case anybody's interested. Really the only caveat to be aware of when you use these long screws is to really make sure you poke them through the insulation good before you drive them in. I kind of poke them in and saw them back and forth just to make a nice clear hole in the insulation. That way when you do go to drive the screw in, you're not going to wind up any of the insulation fibers in the wall. And these are 6-inch screws. These are 5.5-inch deep bays. I really only need to drive these in 1/2 of an inch to pin up that insulation, and so that's not a whole lot. This is a pretty aggressive thread on the drywall screw, and so there really doesn't take a whole lot of turning to put these screws in. So that's one big change. Screws instead of nails, but it worked out great, and I like that approach. It's a little bit, I think, more strategic than whacking in nails. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I've come back and I've taped up all the joints between my bats with tuck tape. This is a Canadian product. It's a building tape, a general purpose building tape. I haven't been able to find it locally, but Amazon has it for $9 or $10 a roll, and I'll put a link to that below as well. This is just a really good general purpose tape with a very strong tacky adhesive. It'll stick to wood, it'll stick to foam board, it'll stick to the craft paper on the insulation, and over time the adhesive won't degrade, it won't absorb into the craft paper, and so this is a good long-term tape product to use for all sorts of things when you're building. And really all I'm using it for is really to fold over and tape together the flaps on the insulation bats. Those flaps are really intended for you to staple these bats up to vertical studs or joists or rafters. And for this application they kind of get in the way, but you still want to make sure you seal those flaps up against each other to have a good moisture barrier. And so you'll see, between bats here, I'll use just some tape to close the flaps up. If there's any cases where I had a gap between the craft paper and like my foam up here, or if I have, on long, tall walls, if I have multiple bats butting up together, I'll put some extra tape on those butt joints to seal things up. But you don't have to go crazy with the tape. I know instinctively, a lot of us would probably think you should fully tape all of these seams, but the way this moisture barrier works on the interior of the building, the effectiveness of these joints is really based on the overall net open area versus closed area of your moisture barrier. And so just think of an example. If we were to take a 2-foot by 2-foot section here and look at it, the vast majority of this section is covered with my moisture barrier. I do have maybe a 1/16 inch to 1/8 inch gap where these flaps have been taped together, 2 feet long. If you calculate the open area of this gap versus the open, or the closed area, I should say, of the rest of this bat here. This is like, I don't know, 0.2% open, which means in this 2x2 sample, I'm like 99.8% closed. And that's plenty fine for a moisture barrier. Because again, you know, this is really just intended to keep excessive indoor moisture from getting into your insulation and causing moisture problems in the wall, causing mold and things like that. This is not meant to be a vapor barrier, a wind barrier, anything like that. That's handled by our house wrap on the outside of the structure. That's where you have to be very strict and keep things very tight. You want to be airtight if possible with a house wrap, because that has a much bigger effect, much more important effect in terms of air infiltration, moisture infiltration, drafts, and things like that. So on the outside, yeah, you have to be strict. On the inside, you know, you really just need to take the flaps and get, you know, up to the 98-99% level of moisture barrier, and that's what I've done here. So, you know, instinctively I'd want to put tape down the whole thing, but you really don't need to. You just need to close this up so it's you know, mostly a tight moisture barrier. So the insulation's up. I'm real happy with the way it turned out. In the past, I've used unfaced insulation and then put up plastic. To me, it's about a wash in terms of labor versus, you know, if you're looking at putting up unfaced insulation and hanging plastic versus using faced insulation and coming back and taping the seams. I will say that taping the seams is easier and more fun, certainly less cursing than hanging a big sheet when you're working alone and trimming it out. So I'm kind of liking the faced insulation with the tape for solo labor. If you have two people, you know, maybe it's easier to do the unfaced bats and hang the plastic and trim it all out. But to me, you know, there are pros or cons to each method. So with the insulation up, I've come back and started putting up my interior wall girts. And I would consider these optional. You know, there are many applications with a pole barn where after you insulate, you're pretty much done, or you don't need interior girts. You might be putting up some sort of diagonal boards which can just run between the posts. You might be hanging some sort of a protective barrier sheet product that you can just staple up to the posts. So you don't always need these wall girts on the inside of the pole barn. When you do need them, like for example, in my case, I want to hang some sort of plywood or OSB or wood boards on the inside here. They don't need to be beefy if you've got a concrete floor, because that floor really can support the majority of the weight of whatever you're putting on your interior walls, even drywall, you know. So in a lot of projects, I will use just 1x lumber for my interior girts. Not quite as thin as what I'd call a furring strip, but something, you know, board that's between 3/4 inch and 1 inch thick. You know, that's still a pretty beefy board, but you don't have to go up to full-on 2x lumber. That said, in this case, I am using 2x4s just because I had some. You know, I've got a sawmill. I tend to saw standard lumber that I think I'm going to use for projects, and I had a pretty good amount of 2x4s. I've got a few store-bought 2x4s mixed in as well. So I'm using 2x4s for my interior girts. It really is overkill, but in terms of the cost and availability and what I had, 2x4s were the choice here. So those have been nailed up. Unlike the exterior girts, I tend to like long girt lumber on the exterior, and I stagger the joints for strength. On the interior, I'm just using 8-foot 2x4s because strength is not super important. So I'm, you know, basically nailing them up between each set of posts, and that's it. So it's pretty quick. It's pretty easy to put these up. And down at the bottom, I bought some pressure treated lumber for my girt down against the floor. I don't really anticipate major moisture problems in here, but if you look at the cost of kiln treated 2x4 versus a pressure treated 2x4, they're about the same right now. So I didn't feel too bad about buying some pressure treated down there for the bottom. That's just a little extra insurance, long term in case, you know, maybe not me, but maybe in the future someone parks a vehicle in here with snow and it melts and water runs around. It'd be better to have that 2x treated down at the bottom, and so that's what I use down there. So basically the girts are up on the interior. That goes pretty quick. I had to do some custom framing around the circuit panel and the HVAC system and around the garage doors, but that's really about thinking ahead to what I'm going to put up on the walls. Again, interior girts are really optional on a pole barn. It just comes down to what you want to hang, whether it's drywood or drywall, plywood, planks, boards, tongue and groove, shiplap, whatever. That's going to dictate whether you even need these, how many you need, where to put them, and all of that. So that really comes down to a function of what you're going to do on your interior. And that kind of brings me to my last topic for this video. I've been looking at different options to put on the walls on the inside of the barn here, both the walls and the ceiling, really. I really don't want to go down the road with drywall. It's not that expensive. It's about $14 a sheet for basic drywall, but I'm just sick of doing drywall. And for a house, that's one thing. For a barn, I'm not convinced it's the best option, and I don't want to deal with taping all the joints and everything anyways, which you need to do if you want to truly get the advantage of drywall as far as like fire protection, moisture issues and everything. You really need to tape all the joints and paint it if you want to get the real benefit of drywall and not let it decay over time out here in a barn or garage type setting. So I'm leaning away from drywall just because I don't want to deal with all the finishing that has to go along with it if you want to do it right. I'm kind of leaning towards a wood product for the walls and the ceiling. So I've priced out some options. The cheapest right now is going to be 7/16 OSB, and that's about $14 for a 4x8 sheet. And that would go up pretty easy on the walls. It'd be a little tedious on the ceilings because it's heavy, but at least for the walls that would go up pretty easily. If I ever want to hang shelves or hooks or anything, you can screw right into that. You don't necessarily have to find a girt or a post because the OSB has really good shear strength, and so if you could put something up with spread out fasteners, it would work great for that. So that's about $14 a sheet. I can step up to a sanded plywood product for $30 to $35 a sheet, and that's going to be 11/32 thickness, 3/8 thickness ballpark with one side sanded that I would face the interior. So 14 for OSB, 30 to 35 for the sanded plywood. There's also a 1/4" Luan plywood for $30 a sheet, and I think that might be good for the ceilings because it's going to be much lighter and easier to handle by myself. But for the walls, for the price, I would just go to the sanded plywood because it'll be thicker and beefier. So those are all in the $30 range. And then the other options would be metal. And I love the idea of metal for the inside of the pole barns, walls and ceiling. You can get white, really brighten things up. But metal is crazy expensive now. It's like even if I go with a really cheap basic metal panel, it's going to be double or triple again what plywood would cost. And I'm sensitive to cost as I near the end of this project, and I've seen how much I've spent on this. It's been fairly economical, to be honest, but I'm definitely conscious of budget at this point, and so I'm leaning away from metal just because of the cost. Another option that would look great on the walls would be pine. I could do tongue and groove or shiplap, or even the pine siding that I put on the exterior I could do on the interior. They're all about the same cost per square foot when you work out the linear foot to square foot conversion for the different types of boards and their overlaps. So I could do pine. That's in the double or almost triple range of plywood. It would look beautiful, and I love working with pine. but I don't really want to spend that much. And you know, the far out option is I could just saw my own boards, but I'm going to have to dry them for at least a year before I put them up in here. I do a lot of work with green lumber. You know, that's not appropriate to be putting up inside a enclosed finished barn with insulation. So I'd have to saw all that, which would be fun, but then I got to find a place to store it and dry that for a year before I can put that up. So that would be very inexpensive, but that's a longer term kind of project. And then kind of the last option for the ceilings would be aluminum soffit or vinyl soffit. And again, I'm thinking of, on the ceiling, something that's lightweight, easy to put up for one person. I can't really get aluminum soffit easily in this area, but I can get vinyl soffit. That's, that's about 1.5 times more than the plywood would be. So effectively, let's say $45 to $50 for a sheet of that equivalent areas to the plywood. You know, soffit goes up real easy. I could use J-channel around the edges, but I don't really need to because I'm going to come back and trim with wood at the top of the walls anyway. So soffit would go up pretty quickly. My main concern with vinyl soffit is I've got my roof rafters and my drop ceiling in the main section. They're 24 on center framed, and I've seen soffit sag over the years between 24-inch centers. Especially in this case, I'll have insulation up in here that might put a little bit of pressure down on that soffit. So I'm not 100% sold on the soffit, other than it would be easy to install. So what I would love to hear is your input. What do you think I should use on the walls? What do you think I should use on the ceiling? If you have any ideas, especially if you have ideas I haven't mentioned or I haven't thought of, you know, please put them in the comments below. But you know, even if you're just thinking about the options I've presented, OSB, sanded plywood, Luan, you know, metal, and then the soffit products for the ceiling. You know, let me know what you think, if you've tried any of these before, if they worked out good, if they didn't. I'd love to get your input on that, and hopefully drive to a decision so that once I finish up the ceiling insulation, I can move on to closing in the walls and trimming everything out, which really should conclude most of the work on this project. So that's going to do it for today. As always, thanks for watching.